We got some updates on how PlayStation is doing, with teasers for the future, but also some sad news. CD Projekt Red might be preparing some surprise releases, and we got way more gaming news to go over, so sit back and let's go. Let's start with the bad news, as Sony Band has laid off around 30% of their staff, which would be about 40 people. We learned earlier this year that the live service game they were working on after Days Gone was cancelled, and they're now starting a new project, and during this pre-production phase they probably don't need a lot of the developers that they now had working for them. Man, the story about this team has been really sad, as now for 6 years they've not launched anything, only the Days Gone remaster, and if they're starting up something now, it might be 10 years since Days Gone came out before we actually see something new from them again. If they end up still being around then. Like, Sony Band has always been an interesting case. It filled holes in Sony's portfolio, like providing a launch game for the Vita and bringing other big franchises to their handhelds, but those games and Days Gone never reached the highs of the titles from other PlayStation studio colleagues. So I think the sad truth is that Sony does not really need them. I hope I'm wrong though, and that they at least get one more shot at creating something cool, because there's so much to love about Days Gone. There are totally talented people at Sony Band. And with the limited amount of PlayStation Studio games coming out now every year, it would be sad to lose one. What that next project is going to be is still unclear though, but Sony still put Band under evolving multi-genre, so it might have multiplayer as well as single player, as that is what the other studios that are in this category are doing, like Guerrilla Games with Horizon 3 and of course Horizon Online. We have Dark Outlaw Games, the new studio from the ex-Call of Duty Zombie developers, so it seems like their game will have a single-player component too, which would be cool. We know Media Molecule, After Dreams, is making a new IP that seemingly has some multiplayer too. And we learned way more about PlayStation thanks to this business meeting. For one, they for the first time have more monthly active users on PS5 than on PS4, with 124 million in total. Still wild that many play on PS4, but it explains why big games still release versions on those platforms. They also note that every financial year they see an increase in PlayStation Plus users going to a higher tier, which is interesting because they sometimes raise the price for those higher tiers as well. This coming week, FBC Firebreak and Battlefield 2042 will be added to those higher PS Plus tiers, by the way. They also once again confirmed that they will be releasing a new big single-player game from their first-party studios every financial year, with this year actually 2, Ghost of Yotei and Death Stranding 2. So we see Wolverine and Intergalactic in the section after that. I'm not sure if they are teasing that both games are coming out in the same period, so April 2026 to March 2027. I think it's probably going to be Wolverine next year and then Intergalactic the year after. So then Cory Barlog's game in 2028, that would be 10 years after he made God of War. Speaking of God of War, this slide is also super interesting, highlighting that God of War is the biggest franchise they have based on engagement hours on PS5, PS4 and PC, which actually, if you think about it, is insane that it has more than Destiny, the live service game with constant content updates. Really, Spider-Man has more than Destiny 2. Now, of course, Xbox is missing here, but still. Horizon being here with only 2 real games, I think is pretty impressive, although Forbidden West and Zero Dawn are huge open world titles, and The Last of Us is a linear single-player game, and that has more played hours. Again, interesting stuff. Curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. We'll go more in depth on the business meeting on the React channel, so stay tuned for that. This week we learned more about the Dragon Age The Veilguard's development. The game underperformed EA's expectations, of course. It caused them to lay off a lot of developers at BioWare. Jason Schreier now put up an article after speaking to 20 plus people who worked on Veilguard, and after reading it, I think it's actually pretty impressive that they ended up with the game that they released, because it was not an easy development cycle. It namely started out as a smaller scale single player game, then because of a mandate from higher up they had to change it into a multiplayer live service title, to focus on replayable missions and not have characters die because they needed to be in this multiplayer world. Basically make Anthem with dragons, but then of course Anthem flopped, so they were like, okay, maybe it's not smart, let's go back to a single player game, only they did not have the proper time to redo things, so they had to repurpose all the multiplayer stuff they had and put them in the single player structure. And you totally kind of see that replayable mission like progression DNA in the Veilguard, where you're constantly teleported to this mission with many enemies before going back to an hub area and doing it over again. But playtesters gave negative feedback during the development, mostly because there were no impactful choices with big impacts, because the multiplayer game did not have that. And still, the final product, Vilgard, lacks that too. So the Mass Effect leaders came in and they added the ending that many people liked. I quit halfway through because of the predictable structure, but I know people loved that final act. So maybe that's actually a bit of good news, that the Mass Effect people did add some great stuff to Dragon Age the Veilguard. They are of course still making that next Mass Effect game. It overall looks like EA favors the Mass Effect team also more, as they would more easily get the green light for things they wanted to do, while the Dragon Age team always had to fight for resources. I'm 100% certain that if this new Mass Effect game does not hit, it's over for BioWare, but just like with Sony Band, I really hope they get this chance, because as I said recently too, with EA cancelling their single-player Black Panther game, we need publishers like EA investing in single-player games and not just live service titles. Curious to hear your thoughts, also after having played Dragon Age the Veilguard, let me know in the comments, and of course a like would really help me out, and subscribe, because we post one of these big gaming news roundup videos every Sunday. Okay, it's time for quick shots, news stories I want to go over quickly. Ubisoft was of course really absent from Summer Game Fest, and well, they now also confirmed that there will be no Ubisoft Forward this year, period. I mean, it makes sense, they only have 2 paid releases announced for their financial year, with Anno and the Prince of Persia Sands of Time remake, and a paid Assassin's Creed release will also be added. And we know that that's very likely the Black Flag remaster, but it might be smarter to shadow drop that, like Oblivion. So no need for a whole event, although I do think they will probably return in June next year if they have Hexay, Far Cry 7, Ghost Recon and Splinter Cell. A pretty crazy lineup if you actually think about it. It has been confirmed though that Ubisoft will be back at Gamescom this year, although that could just be for Anno. One of the biggest announcements during an overall kind of muted Summer Game Fest without any really huge reveals was the fact that all the games during the Xbox Showcase can run on the brand new ROG Xbox Ally. Now sure, maybe more technical heavy games like Fable, Gears of War E-Day were absent, but it's still interesting. I think that you can play all the games that they showed natively on the go. Although it's probably only for the X variant. We now by the way got leaked prices, €600 for the regular white one and 900 for that black X model, which is kind of insane. Pre-order should go live in August with a release in October. It's leaked information, but I think it might be true. Let me know what you think about the Xbox Ally in the comments down below. Okay, so that was already a rumor, but let's do another one in the weekly rumor roundup where I give stars, with 3 being I believe it and 1 being let's take this with a huge grain of salt. CD Projekt Red namely cannot let go of their games, it seems. Last year they noted that nobody was working on Cyberpunk 2077 anymore, but now earlier this month they announced update 2.3. It should be dropping on June 26th, although we don't really know what it contains just yet. Well, that's not the rumor. Now the rumor actually is that Virtuos, the studio who worked on the recent update, is developing a new DLC for Cyberpunk. Because we have a senior writer who on LinkedIn noted that they started in April 2025 on this project and coordinated with the narrative designer to conceive, write and polish a side quest for upcoming DLC releases. We just learned that Phantom Liberty sold 10 million copies, which is insane for an expansion, so almost 1 in 3 Cyberpunk players bought the DLC. So I think it makes sense for them to outsource another expansion. Even if they sell half of that, it's still an insane amount of profit. But it gets crazier, as even The Witcher 3 might also be getting a DLC in 2026. This according to Polish podcasters Rock and Boris. This should be made by the studio Fool's Theory, who is also in charge of The Witcher 1 remake. Like CD Projekt Red is of course full focused on Witcher 4 and they have a Cyberpunk sequel in pre-production, but The Witcher 4 won't be out until 2027 at the earliest, so having some releases in between that period made by other studios so it doesn't impact the 2 games they are working on could be smart to still get some revenue in. I'm gonna give 2 stars. Again, I think it makes a ton of sense, but plans can of course change, and it's only one source with kind of a track record, but also not an amazing one, reporting on it. We'll of course let you know, but yeah, let me know in the meantime if you would play a new Cyberpunk or Witcher 3 DLC in the comments. So this coming week we got quite some fun stuff. On June 21st there will be a 15-minute gameplay presentation of The Blood of Dawnwalker. So some uncut gameplay from this new game from veterans who worked on The Witcher 3. If you're not familiar, don't worry, we will have a video going up with the biggest Summer Game Fest reveals that I think will be interesting to you, so keep an eye out for that. The actor behind John Marston is teasing some exciting news for this coming week, which could be related to a Switch 2 or a next-gen release for Red Dead Redemption 2. Of course, let's not expect anything, but fingers crossed. I will of course keep you posted. So this coming week it will be 3 weeks since the most recent Assassin's Creed Shadows update. Normally they are on a 3-week schedule, but it seems like the update will not be coming this week, so it will be next week then. Maybe we hear some new info on the update, of course. I will do the weekly reset stream on Thursday, tell you about it, and maybe have a Shadows video this week as well. And of course, the weekly Monday stream where we go over all the news will be going live. A link to that, countdown in the video description. Hope to see you there, and way more content coming your way. So subscribe to not miss anything. A like would really help me out. And check out our previous video by clicking on the screen. I will speak to you soon. Goodbye.